So now let's break down how President Yoon's overseas trip to Southeast Asia has been so far with Mason Richey, Professor of International Politics at Hankuk University of Foreign Studies. Good morning, Professor.
Good morning.
Well,
Thanks
it's always good to see you. And as we've heard, President Yoon stressed that no country should be kind of left behind in global digital transformation and offered to take the lead to ensure this does not happen. How convincing was Yoon's appeal to other nations on a topic that he chose himself?
Yeah, so these kinds of large-scale initiatives are, of course, at first vague, and they're unclear in terms of the details, and other nations will, I think, want to take a wait-and-see attitude about how much priority this gets going forward. Presumably, in this particular case, it will be a lot. Why digital? In the first place, of course, it refers to technology where Korea has a strong role to play. In the second place, there's an economic security dimension to this, which obviously is increasingly important. And then thirdly, this is a business-related issue and private sector led, or at least that's a significant part of it. It also, in some ways, fits in with some of the elements of the South Korean Indo-Pacific strategy, which has been slowly rolled out during the swing through Southeast Asia. And then why inclusive? Obviously, this is possibly a message to China to say that South Korea is aware of China's concerns about being excluded out of certain groupings in the region. This fits in with a global pivotal state concept that the Yoon administration wants to work on, where choosing an area and being a leader in that sort of universal important area, I think, is significant. It also speaks to developing nations. But overall, I think the rest of the world will take a wait-and-see attitude and see how well this is developed going forward.
Right. Now, I want to shift the focus to the Trilateral summit between South Korea, Japan, and U.S. It doesn't seem like anything new was said, but the three did agree to kind of share intelligence on missile launches, as North Korea has been stepping up. And is this a step towards a positive relationship between South Korea and Japan specifically?
In the first place, I think there is something significant in this discussion or this release of discussion about sharing the missile launch information, and that's that the statement refers to that sharing of information being made in real time, which means we would be going beyond the GSOMIA agreement, the General Security of Military Information Agreement, which already exists between South Korea and Japan. So I think there maybe is a little bit something new there. I think that there's a message to China there and also to North Korea. The message to North Korea is one of increasing extended deterrence and cooperation among the three allies to shore that up in the face of North Korea's continuing development of its nuclear and missile program. The message to China is that this is a small first incremental step towards greater Japan, U.S., South Korea cooperation on missile defense, which China won't like going forward. And so here the hidden message, I think, or the not so hidden message in some ways, is that China should take some type of effort to rein in North Korea unless it wants to see this trilateral cooperation, which frankly, Beijing considers to be a kind of a nightmare scenario. Whether or not this speaks much to Seoul-Tokyo relations improving, going forward, I think most of the problems there are bilateral. So this is really more of a trilateral initiative. But it probably does speak, at least in some ways, to how things have improved since Yoon and Kishida have come into office compared to the time when, for instance, Moon and Abe were leading their respective nations.
Right. And speaking of China, President Yoon and South Korea are clearly an ally with the U.S., especially in the face of North Korean provocations. However, there is a chance you might be meeting with President Xi Jinping in person during this trip. How do you think this summit would unfold if it does happen?
So in some ways, that would be a feather in the cap of Yoon to have managed to have a meeting with Xi, although I wouldn't be, in my estimation, too happy about that in some ways if I were South Korea. It might be a bit of a poisoned chalice. The fact is, since Yoon has come into office, against the expectations of many experts and analysts, China has actually been relatively benign vis-a-vis South Korea. It hasn't put pressure on South Korea, particularly economically. rhetorically or diplomatically, despite some developments in the improvement of the relations between Seoul and Washington and Seoul and Tokyo, that Beijing probably isn't very happy about. There are a lot of reasons for why that's the case, but I think a number of people expect that probably not to last for very long. And indeed, there are some areas of real disagreement involving security of economic and technology relations between U.S., South Korea, and the rest of the world. There are issues involving, as we just talked about, the trilateral cooperation between the U.S., South Korea, and Japan. The fact is, China's been, relatively benign in terms of its neglect of South Korea. And I think that that's not necessarily such a bad thing. So if I were Yoon, I would actually be relatively cautious about even wanting to have a meeting. Don't poke the bear unless you're absolutely required to.
Right. I mean, it is a complicated situation at the moment as everyone is there. Thank you again for your insights this morning, and I hope you have a great day, Professor.
Great, you as well. Thank you for having me.